So welcome to our webinar this morning. As I say, we have run a couple of series of webinars based around the different stages of the recruitment process, and more recently the skills that employers are looking for, particularly in a post-COVID workforce. And we've done webinars looking at individual elements of these skills. So most recently we've been looking at authentic leadership, we've looked at motivation, we've looked at problem solving, critical thinking. And all of the webinars we've done are uploaded to our YouTube channel, SRS Recruitment and Employability Expert. So you can watch them there at your leisure. This webinar is more of a standalone one, based upon some recent research that we've done with the Institute of Student Employers, which we're very grateful to be able to share with you. And just a couple of introductions before we kick off. And for those of you who don't know me already, and there's certainly a few names there that I recognised in the chat who certainly do, and have probably heard me introduce myself a number of times now. But for those of you who haven't, I'm Helen, and I'm the University Partnerships Manager for SRS, Recruitment and Employability Expert. And we work with a number of graduate employers, helping to design and deliver their recruitment processes. And we then feed that knowledge into the work we do with universities and the work we do with students and graduates. So we run a lot of webinars, a lot of workshops, and a lot of practical exercises and assessment centres designed to give students and graduates the best chance to practice and prepare for the recruitment process. Very sociable, I certainly like to think so, and you can see there that I'm on Twitter, and LinkedIn in particular is the one that I'm particularly active on. Please do feel free to connect with me on those platforms. If you're not comfortable asking any questions during the session, please do reach out to me on there instead. Always really love following up with people after each webinar. Zoe, do you want to say hello?
Yes, hello everyone. My name's Zoe. I'm the Operations Coordinator here at SRS. So I support the team on all the different projects we work on, such as our assessment centre events, webinars, all that kind of thing. Yeah, as Helen says, I would love to connect with you as well. Please use my details there to send LinkedIn requests or Twitter follows. And I'll be in the chat box today, so please do send any questions or thoughts. It would be great to get some discussion going there as well.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Zoe. And yeah, as I say, please do post your comments and questions. If you can set the Zoom chat to all panelists and attendees, it just means that everyone can see your contribution there. It just makes us a bit easier for us to discuss. So there continues to be so much talk about things such as like the skills agenda, skills for jobs, and skills gaps. And I'm sure we'll all agree that the development of skills is essential for people to enter the labour market and to maintain their employability, as well as being a major driving force of growth in the economy. What people don't necessarily agree on is what the most important skills are and how these should be developed or demonstrated. Now, of course, this is going to vary depending on the role or industry that you're in, but we did want to try and establish some common ground between these areas. Now, as partners of the Institute of Student Employers, we saw an opportunity to collaborate with them on this. And for those of you who don't know, the Institute of Student Employers, who I'll refer to as the ISC going forward, they're the UK's leading independent voice for student employers. So they bring together a lot of employers, they bring together universities and schools and colleges from the education sector, and a lot of supplier partners like us at SRS. And they bring them together to discuss and share best practice in all aspects of student recruitment and development. Now at SRS, a little while back, we began by asking our student following what skills they'd like our support with. And we created a free webinar series based upon this. And we've mentioned that recordings are on our YouTube channel. We also delved into some of the ISC research, particularly their student development survey, to see the skills and attributes that their employer members focused on. And we wanted to build on this by drilling down to what was most important. And rather than looking at the student and the employer perspective in isolation, we also wanted to provide a direct comparison between them and to include universities and suppliers in this. Do students and graduates have a good understanding of the skills that are most important to employers? And are universities and employers supporting the areas that students most want to develop? These are the kind of questions that we wanted to address as part of a wider student survey and an ISE poll. And you can see here the 12 skills that we selected. And this was based upon ISE research, where they listed a number of key skills as part of 4 areas. You know, they looked at attitudes and behaviours, technical skills, transferable skills, and workplace skills. We wanted to provide a particular focus on soft skills and behaviours, and also took account of some of the student feedback we'd already had. So, for example, we had a number of students who wanted to look further at learning agility. So that was one that we definitely wanted to include. There's a bit of a combination there of how we formed this list of the key 12, because I'm conscious that there are lots of other skills outside of this. We then created a survey that asked a series of questions based upon these 12 key skills. And we received 482 responses from ISE members, and that breaks down into 243 universities, 40 suppliers, and 199 employers. Now, thinking about the university responses, this tends to be representative of careers professionals. Suppliers are organisations like us at SRS, who are usually hired by employers or universities to support with early careers recruitment and development. And you can see that the 199 employer responses represent a range of industries there. They do tend to be the bigger graduate employers, but there are also some very small and medium-sized enterprises involved there as well. So it is a good reflection of the early careers recruiters across the UK. Our sister company, GradTouch, also reached out to students and graduates, typically aged between 18 to 24. So we were mainly looking at recent graduates there. And you can see that we got 567 responses. So a mixture there of graduates, undergraduates, and postgraduates. So some great samples there. And of those 567 students and graduates, most recognise the importance of key skills, with 91% of survey respondents confirming that they were definitely doing something outside of their immediate degree programme to develop those skills, which is really quite encouraging. Most are seeking part-time work, placements or internships, and substantial minorities are joining clubs, doing charity work and volunteering, or taking part in those key university events. We even had one who commented that they developed their skills by becoming a social media influencer, which I thought was a really good example, actually. Really quite a creative one, and one you don't come across as often. But the question remains, looking at all of this work that students and graduates are doing to develop their skills, is this enhancing the skills that employers are actually looking for? Now, from those 12 skills and attributes that we listed before, we asked employers, educators and suppliers, and finally students and graduates to identify the top 3 that they think are the most important to demonstrate in the recruitment process. And these are the high-level results, where you can see that all 3 of them rank problem solving as the most important skill. And there's some overlap there for resilience and learning agility. Now, this chart here goes into more detail, and it shows the proportion of each group who agreed with a particular skill being important. And you can see that an overwhelming majority of 69% of students and graduates ranked problem solving as one of the top 3 skills they believe employers are looking for. To a much lesser extent, 37% of students also agreed that learning agility is important, along with employers having this as one of their top 3. However, from this point, this is when the student and graduate responses do start to diverge. And you can see that 44% of them believe that time management is one of those all three most important skills. And when we spoke to some of the students and graduates who'd done this survey, some of them associated it with showing how they can meet deadlines and being able to prove to an employer that they can use their time productively. They believe this to be much more important to show than things such as commercial awareness and resilience, which are both ranked highly by ISE members. And it's also worth noting that some of the student and graduate answers to this question, they're less concentrated, there's less clear majorities compared to the ISE members. Does this perhaps suggest an overall level of uncertainty about what employers are really looking for? Are students and graduates not so sure? For educators and suppliers, for those universities, they've highlighted commercial awareness as the second most important skill to demonstrate. And although it doesn't quite feature in their top three, employers also agree that this is very important. And so you can see there that universities and schools and colleges, they're broadly in agreement with employers, which is good because it suggests that the advice provided by the career services in these areas is well aligned with the skills highlighted by employers. So that's important to note. We then asked ISE members which area they were most commonly supporting students to develop. And for employers, this development activity is probably more focused on the programs that employers are running once they've employed students or graduates. And you can see there is a clear alignment between the skills that employers are looking for and the skills they subsequently develop and therefore continue to highlight as important, namely problem solving and resilience. For educators and suppliers, development activity is going to be more aimed at helping students and graduates to find jobs and to develop their career. Therefore, career management and self-awareness rank highly for them. And although this is somewhat different to what they have highlighted as being important to demonstrate in the recruitment process, you'd probably expect universities to be focused on developing these areas for them to be supporting with career management, for example. For students and graduates, we asked them which skills they most wanted support with. And there is a definite mismatch between what they perceive to be important to demonstrate in the recruitment process and what they want to develop. So, for example, only 9% thought that negotiating and influencing is important to show in the recruitment process, but 48% want to develop this. And it seems that bigger majorities want help developing skills that are perhaps a bit more role-based, such as leadership and dealing with conflict. Perhaps these students and graduates thought they needed a bit more practice at these in a work environment, as opposed to broader concepts such as learning agility. I can see that someone's just raised their hand. If you do want to use the chat to post any questions or comments, Zoe will pick them up there, and I'll also be taking questions at the end as well. Okay, so again, this chart goes into a bit more detail for that particular question around the skills that students want to develop. And that mismatch that we talked about continues when you compare students and graduates to ISE members. And this chart shows the proportion who agreed that a particular skill was important to develop. Now, although it wasn't quite in the top 3 skills for students and graduates, all 3 groups were broadly in agreement that commercial awareness is one to focus on. That's one to develop. However, the discrepancies between what employers are focused on developing and what the students and graduates want to develop are very clear. And this could indicate a bit of a mismatch between what employers are recruiting graduates for and what graduates believe they're being recruited for. So, for example, will graduates really be expected to deal with conflict when they're just starting out on their career, and therefore they don't need to worry about developing this skill as much? There's also some interesting patterns to note with regards to employers. So they reported that they often recruit for learning agility and emotional intelligence, and yet they don't typically develop these once employees are hired. And this might suggest that these skills are viewed as being more innate. And on the other hand, employers, they're much less likely to look for recruits with negotiating and influencing, with leadership and career management skills, but they are much more likely to develop these. So this kind of reinforces my earlier point about these skills not being one that employers expect students to have at the point of hire. Instead, these areas are ones that can be developed once they're in the job. Now, by visualizing the responses to these two questions in some Venn diagrams, we can see the overlap or lack of overlap in some cases, and start to form a bit of hierarchy of skills that are viewed as being important to develop and demonstrate for all three groups. Namely problem solving and learning agility, which feature for both questions as being important to demonstrate and develop. And then you have resilience, commercial awareness, and career management as also being very strong considerations. So we're starting to form those top 5 areas to focus on. We then went on to look at a different area. So what approaches are employers using to assess these different skills? And employers do use a range of approaches to assess for key skills in the recruitment process. But in most cases, the assessment centre and the interview are critical points at which employers make up their minds. There are other opportunities to demonstrate these skills, and you can see there problem solving is assessed as part of psychometric tests and group exercises. However, it's very clear that assessment centres continue to be one of the most important parts of the recruitment process. And primarily, they're used to simulate the requirements of the role and to assess candidates in workplace scenarios, therefore helping to predict a candidate's future performance. They're also one of the best ways of being able to assess a candidate's interpersonal skills. Definitely a very pivotal part of the recruitment process. We should also remember that recruitment processes do build up a cumulative picture of candidates. And so the importance of the interview and the assessment centre stages, they're still going to take into account other information that has been gathered earlier on, such as from the psychometric tests or the application form. We then asked people to identify the top 3 areas of the recruitment process that they believe students and graduates need the most support with. And again, you can see the high level results here. So employers believe that students need the most support in online assessment centres, application forms, and psychometric tests. And there is broad agreement with this from educators and suppliers, although they do also highlight the importance of CVs and cover letters. And this might be because some of these universities are working with a number of smaller organisations, where the use of these approaches is more common than amongst some of the larger ISE employers. So we are, some of these SMEs out there are still very much using paper application forms, depending on that size of the organisation. But again, we can see here that students and graduates have chosen very differently to ISE members in terms of the areas that they perceive they need the most support with. And this chart provides that further detail and again shows the proportion who agreed that students and graduates need support with particular stages of the recruitment process. And there's a clear lack of alignment between employers and students and graduates. So students certainly recognise the importance of being prepared for assessment centres, but 27% of them want support with face-to-face events, as opposed to only 13% wanting support with online assessment centres. Now, this made me question as to whether students and graduates appreciate the extent to which assessment centres and indeed other aspects of the recruitment process will be online in the future. And a recent poll, a separate poll that the ISE did of 198 employers, so this was different to this particular piece of research, but that was done a couple of months ago, and it confirmed that 39% of their employers were going to be running their assessment centres online, with a further 42% delivering at the very least a blended approach from September 2021. So, you know, some of these digital elements that have been used during the recent pandemic, they are here to stay. Therefore, students and graduates should definitely seek to improve their confidence and understanding of these digital recruitment approaches in particular. Particularly as 38% of employers think that they need more support with online assessment centres. And 25% of those same employers, you know, they've also identified that students need more support with online interviews, whereas only 11% of students agree with that. Instead, again, 31% of students, you know, they want support with those face-to-face interviews instead of the online ones. You know, perhaps further evidence that they're not necessarily appreciating how much is going to be online going forward. Perhaps not as up to date as they could be with some of the recruitment processes that are being used. Now, in terms of where students and graduates expect to get this support from, over 80% seek this from their university career service, with high majorities also using friends, family, and looking to employers for help, which is exactly what we want to see in terms of making the most of that university career service, particularly as well after you've graduated. There's some great support there and programmes from universities for anywhere up to 2 years after you've left university. And I could see the level of support being given by employers as well. I can see that getting higher in terms of the interaction and projects that they're working with university students on, and some of the employability hubs and virtual events that they're providing. And I just wanted to close by looking at overall expectations with regards to the student employment market. Because over the last 3 months, the ISE has also been tracking the confidence of its members by asking them whether they agree or disagree with the following 4 statements. So that's them again going out to universities, suppliers and employers, asking them to comment on their confidence in, will my organisation grow over the next 3 years? Do they believe that the worst of the COVID crisis is over? Are there sufficient opportunities available for young people who are leaving education or have recently left education? And what are their confidence levels like with regards to thinking that the worst of the economic crisis is over? Now, overall, ISE members remain uncertain about these 4 statements. They are mildly, and it is mildly, negative about the number of opportunities for young people and about the wider prospects for the economy. However, they are also mildly positive about the growth prospects of their own organisations and believe that on balance, the worst of the COVID pandemic is over. And this perhaps reflects a situation in which, you know, economic news continues to be quite volatile, and COVID cases are still out there, despite the widespread rollout of the vaccine. So you can understand that level of uncertainty at this point. And just to kind of reflect on some of the conclusions that we've been led to believe from having looked at this recent data, these are some of our thoughts. You know, that students and graduates recognise the importance of problem solving and learning agility to employers, which is really good to see. Resilience and commercial awareness are also important to demonstrate to employers, but it would seem that students and graduates are less likely to highlight this within the recruitment process. Students and graduates may be less likely to focus on developing skills which are less important to employers, such as negotiating and influencing and dealing with conflict. So going back to that point around employers don't necessarily expect to see this as much in the recruitment process. Educators and suppliers, universities and so on, are broadly aligned with employers and will continue to work together to provide that relevant advice and support. And as we'd expect, employers use a wide range of different approaches to test candidate skills, but assessment centres and interviews are certainly the most common. And finally there, we looked at that point around students and graduates primarily requesting support with more face-to-face selection stages, when perhaps there should be a greater focus on preparing for digital or at least hybrid approaches to recruitment. So thanks for listening today. I'm conscious that was a lot of data there to share, and we certainly got time for questions and to go into a bit more detail about it. Just a bit of a final reminder at this point, if you haven't already attended our Skills for Success webinar series, please do review our YouTube channel where we've got the recordings of our recent webinars. And we really do go into the detail behind some of these key skills. So if there's any of you wondering what learning agility is, which is obviously a very, very important one to explore and is very important to employers, please do look up that webinar, because we look at what it means, we look at how to develop it and how it's assessed. And we certainly explore problem solving as well. So as I say, we've written whole subjects on that. But I'm certainly happy to take any questions now. I'll just get the chat up there. And if anyone has any particular thoughts or any opinions really on some of that data. Zoe, have we had anything come through in particular?
Yeah, so we've had a few questions, which has been good. Just a reminder to everyone that, as Helen said about our previous webinars being on our YouTube channel, we'll also be uploading the recording of this webinar. So do check back for that if you happen to miss the start. We've just been having a bit of a chat about the general application process, and someone was saying that they've maybe had experienced some difficulties in terms of applying and not getting through to the next stage. So I don't know if you could maybe say a bit about that, Helen, in terms of how this webinar might help with getting through that first application stage.
So I suppose I have a couple of questions with that. I mean, it's obviously much more competitive out there at the moment in terms of getting through those initial selection stages. And in a lot of cases, when there's a high volume of candidates, some of the employers aren't able to give feedback on why you haven't passed. And I know that's a real source of frustration for a lot of candidates. Can you get feedback from elsewhere? So particularly if you submitted an application and it didn't make it, can you ask someone from a university careers team or some kind of careers professional to review it and give you feedback on why they think it could have been made better and next steps on how to do it differently next time? So seek feedback from that other source. Again, we have written a webinar on each of the different stages of the recruitment process. One of the things that I find candidates often fall foul of is that they apply for lots, which is fair enough. I appreciate your reasons for doing that. But you need to make sure that it is tailored to the organisation, and it's a lot of work to do that every time. So for me, applying for a job, it's about going through that job description, highlighting the key skills that they're looking for and making sure that I find a way to address those key skills as part of my application. So, it's about highlighting those key words. If they mention leadership, make sure you weave leadership somewhere into that cover letter or into that application form. The cover letter is something that's used more by smaller and medium-sized organisations, but that's a fantastic opportunity to showcase things such as commercial awareness. And you could see actually on one of those charts I shared a bit earlier on, a lot of the skills were assessed in assessment centres and interview, but some of them, there was really quite high percentages for things like the cover letter and the application form. So I think commercial awareness about employers were assessing, 25% of employers were assessing that as part of the initial application stage. And again, as I say, we have done a webinar on commercial awareness and how to weave that into those earlier stages of the recruitment process. But they would be some of my initial top tips, and to not give up. I know it can be quite soul destroying when you're getting rejection after rejection, particularly as it is tough out there at the moment. but just try wherever possible to get feedback and to do something differently next time. Hope that helps. Is there any other thoughts there? What did you all think about the research? Was it surprising? Was there anything you weren't expecting there? Are you all familiar with learning agility and what that means? Anyone got any thoughts on that? Or if there's any further questions that came up earlier, Zoe?
I think that's addressed all the questions that we've had so far, Helen.
Okay. Brilliant. I mean, if I had to leave you with some final thoughts from this, it would really be to drum home a couple of points, and that is, if you're not already familiar with some of those key skills that we identified, definitely explore them further. I keep coming back to learning agility. I find it fascinating. Actually, I've done a lot of reading in the area. And the fact of the matter is that some of the jobs you're applying for at the moment won't exist in the future, because things are just changing more than they've ever done before, I would argue. And the pandemic certainly accelerated that. So you need to be someone who can learn constantly. The skills you have now might not be relevant. They might be obsolete in a few years' time. So if you're someone who's got potential and who can learn things really quickly, that's really powerful. So it's about showing examples of how you can learn new things, how you can pick up things quickly when you've been outside of your comfort zone. The going outside of the comfort zone one just keeps coming up for me in terms of giving evidence of how you take risks, how you want to grow and learn, how you're resilient. Think of examples in that area. That for me is a big one. So yeah, I've probably gone off on a bit of a tangent there, but do explore some of those skills that ISE members have identified as being important. And my second one would be to do whatever you can to practice and prepare for particularly digital elements of the recruitment process, because certainly a lot of the employers, even if they're not doing it all digital, they're certainly doing elements of it online, whether that's the online interview or the assessment centre. A few employers I've spoken to recently have got a bit of an appetite to return to in-person events. And I think definitely that final interview is one that they want to be in person. But they have seen the advantages of running assessment centres online. I mean, in a lot of cases, it's easier for people like yourself to join if you've got the tech, because you don't have to travel up and down the country. But they have seen how much more efficient it can be to do some of this stuff online, and group exercises still work very well online. So just be prepared to get your head around that and how best you can prepare yourself for those types of exercises. So we'll just put there, we've got there, resilient. Could you give me more hint about resilience skills? So yeah, resilience is another fascinating skill. Can I just say that there's whole books on resilience, and there's whole workshops on it. In one of our webinars, we recommended reading for, I think it was the Chimp Paradox. And there's a book by Stephen Covey called The 7 Habits of Effective People. And this is all kind of based around resilience. They're two of my favourite books that I've read in that area. Resilience it's got a few kind of definitions attached to it, but it's about being able to bounce back from failure and to actually see failure as an opportunity to learn. So there's some people who make mistakes in life and it just floors them. It just knocks them off the game completely. They struggle to pick themselves up after it. And it holds them back. But there's other people out there who see making mistakes as an opportunity to learn and think, right, okay, that didn't go so well, let's try this, let's experiment. And it's about showing how you've learned from your mistakes, and how you can work under pressure, you can deal with those problems and challenges, and learn from them and grow. That's a kind of very kind of in a nutshell. Resilience is a huge subject. Again, it goes back to getting yourself out of your comfort zone, because that will really build your resilience. But yeah, and so thank you, Alistair. You've just put, you're not surprised about the difference in perspective between employees and students. Yeah, I was a little bit surprised in some elements. I think those surveys suggest that students are quite focused on developing some of those job probably more job related skills like leadership and negotiating and influencing. It perhaps goes back to that point around it's kind of linked to those technical skills a bit more, when actually we really do need to be looking at developing those soft skills that are transferable between different roles and different industries. So that growth mindset, that learning agility, that commercial awareness and so on. Okay, but yeah. But as I say, there was a lot of information there, a lot of slides with a lot of percentages on. It will be on the recording, so you can obviously pause and have a look at it in a bit more detail there on our YouTube channel. It'll get uploaded this afternoon. But yeah, if anyone has any other further questions, thanks for joining us this morning. It's been some good interaction. Okay. Well, if there's no further questions, I'll call an end to the session. I hope to see some of you joining us for I think it's our final. We've got another webinar this afternoon on authentic leadership. We've got 2 final sessions next week looking at learning agility. So yeah, I hope to see you on that one. Closing off with a bang. And yes, someone's just put, will this PowerPoint be shared? Yes. So this whole session has been recorded. So, you know, you can pause it to kind of stay on particular slides if you want to have a look at it. But thank you very much.